So the topic for this evening is actually federal incentives, and Noni had sent it out as federal incentives for houses of worship. But I asked her, would you like me to also cover federal incentives for households, for people for their homes? And she said, yeah, go ahead. Because the talk that I originally gave on this was in May of last year and it covered both. So I said, why don't we include them? Because, you know, people on this call are not just interested in their house of worship, they're also interested in their own home. So can you guys see my slide deck?
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and just run through this and then we can have some discussions if you have any questions. And this is not going to cover every last federal incentive because there are so many, frankly. I'm covering the ones that I think could be of interest to most people or most faith communities, or many people in many faith communities. But this is by no means an exhaustive list, just so I'm clear on that. So we're going to start with the household information. And there are rebates and there are tax credits. And the various changes that were put in place due to the Inflation Reduction Act are valid for 10 years through 2032. So let's take a look. There's a whole long list of incentives, some of which are rebates and some of which are tax credits, and some of which used to be tax credits and can be converted to rebates. And if that isn't confusing enough, I don't know what is. But I added this link here, and I will ask Noni to send this deck out later. It has an FAQs from energy.gov about home energy rebates, because it is, frankly, it does get confusing. So you'll have that to refer to, but let me give you a run through on what's here. So the first two are ones that are really designed for low to moderate income households. These are rebates. So the first one is called HERA, and it looks like my screen is not fitting properly for some reason, but I think it's high efficiency home. Yeah, there we go, high efficiency electrification rebate. So this one specifically is rebates to replace equipment in your home whose power does not come from electricity. So if you have appliances or systems being run on natural gas or fuel oil, if you're on the East Coast where they still use fuel oil, this rebate is specifically to replace those with electrically driven systems, which I can tell you flat out are more efficient. They just are. These are point of sale rebates, and what you can get depends on your income. So if you're in moderate income, which is equal to or less than 150% of your area median income. So this varies by location. So you have to go out and find out what's the area median income for your area. If you're in the moderate income, you can get 50% of your costs covered. If you're low income, which means you're less than or equal to 80% of the area mean income, you can get 100% of your costs covered, up to a total of $14,000, which is absolutely amazing. This is a huge, huge, huge benefit for lower income people who live in energy poverty, where they're spending a huge percentage of their income on electricity and gas, because they have old, inefficient appliances and they don't have the money to replace them. So this is a major big deal for people who are of low to moderate income, to really help them get out of energy poverty. So next one is also a rebate. This is the Whole Home Energy Reduction Rebate Program. So this one, you do not have to replace non-electric stuff. This is about efficiency improvement. So let's say you have a clothes dryer today, and you replace it with a heat pump clothes dryer, which is much more efficient. It is the most efficient clothes dryer on the market. You may have energy savings of, I don't know, 25% or more, right? If you have energy savings between 20 and 35%, you can get a rebate of up to $2,000 or 50% of the cost. If your energy savings are greater than 35%, you can get $4,000 or 50% of the cost. And if you happen to be low to moderate income, and here's a little trick for this program, low to moderate income is the low income cutoff for the previous program. So just remember that the way they define these depends on the program. But if you happen to fall into that less than or equal to 80% of your area median income, you can get twice as much money or up to 80% of the project cost. So this is a massive benefit, again, for low-income people to get them out of energy poverty. Now, it cannot be combined with other federal grants or rebates. but you can combine it with tax credits. So these first two, these rebate programs, will be administered by states. It's a federal incentive, but the way the law was written, states administer it. So to find out where your state stands on this, I went to get a recent article to see where everybody stands. New York is the very first state to have its plan to administer this approved. If you live in New York State, you can benefit from these rebates today, tomorrow, next week. The plan is in place. The other ones who have submitted their plans are listed here. And the next one they think probably that will get approved is California. So if you're in California, the state level program to get these rebates when you buy this stuff, these are point of sale rebates. When you buy these things, it's probably California. But these other states that you see listed here have submitted plans and hopefully will get them approved quite soon, unless the federal government looks at them and says, you know, there's some problems with your plan, people. And these states are the ones that have yet to apply. They do have until August 16th to notify the Department of Energy that they're going to apply, and they have until the end of January of next year to complete their applications. So if you're in one of these states, which I happen to be, I'm in Texas, you might want to write to your elected officials and encourage them to get on the stick, because the sooner they apply, the sooner they can start the program, and the sooner low-income people in your state can get the heck out of energy poverty. So this is a really big deal. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This is a tax credit. So this is different from the first two, which are point of sale rebates. So tax credits mean that you have to owe taxes to benefit. Just so that's clear, right? Okay, so energy efficient home improvement tax credit. If you do something that improves the efficiency of your electrical systems, or you upgrade your electrical systems, or you have an energy audit, you can get a tax credit for up to 30% of the costs with an annual maximum of $3,200. Now, there are specific limits depending on what you are doing. So for example, you want to put in a door that seals better and reduces, losses of heating and cooling to the outdoors. Well, you can only get $250 per door, okay, for that kind of work. So there are some limits depending on the specific project. And down here, $2,000 per year for heat pumps and some other things. But there is no lifetime maximum. So you could basically plan out a series of efficiency upgrades to your home and get yourself tax credit every year, which is pretty cool. I also think this is one of the tax credits where you can carry it over if you don't owe enough taxes in year one. I think you can carry this one over and you can apply it to taxes that you owe in year two, I believe, because some of them you can do that. So then there's a clean energy tax credit, and this one is specifically for putting renewable energy on your residence, whether that's rooftop solar, battery storage, a solar hot water heater, a geothermal system. I mean, if you have enough property to put wind, The other thing that's interesting is that some community solar ownership models qualify, and the ones that qualify are this. If there's community solar in your area, where buying into the community solar means that you literally purchase and own a subset of the panels, you can get a tax credit for that. But not all community solar is set up that way. So you would have to see how the community solar in your area is set up. But if you are literally buying a portion of the panels, you qualify for this tax credit without them being installed on your home. I believe this is also a tax credit where if you don't owe enough taxes in year one, I believe you can carry this one over to the subsequent year as well, I believe. Next one, EV. So these used to be tax credits only. As of this year, they are now point of sale rebates. So it's up to, this is for used EVs. And because at this point, EVs have been out long enough that used ones are more available. And I recently read a statistic that most people actually buy used cars. So I decided to put this one first. You can get 30% of the price, up to $4,000 for a used EV, as long as you buy it from a dealer. You cannot buy it from the owner. That does not qualify. You have to buy it from a dealer. There are income limits. This tax credit is not refundable. None of these credits are refundable. None of them are refundable. But there's a neat little trick you can do that if you don't owe taxes, you can transfer your credit to the dealership in exchange for a rebate. That's essentially how they converted the thing that was a tax credit last year to a point of sale rebate in 2024, is that you essentially transfer your tax credit to the dealer, who then gives you a rebate. Sweet, huh? And you can do this for new EVs as well. The tax credit here is $7,500. Now, there are restrictions on this tax credit, and not just income restrictions like the other one, but there are certain requirements about where the minerals in the battery come from, certain battery component requirements. So there's basically some local manufacturing requirements to get the tax credit. So you have to be careful if you're going to purchase a new electric vehicle that the vehicles you're looking at qualify for the tax credit, because if they don't have the sufficient local component of these various things, they won't qualify. There is a price limit as well. So if you want to go out and buy, I don't know, a Cybertruck from Tesla, guess what? Costs too much money, doesn't qualify for the credit, because I think it's over 80,000, isn't it? I could be wrong. It's not that I'm interested in buying the Cybertruck, but there are limits. So if you wanted to buy a very expensive vehicle, you won't get the credit. And again, to convert this to point of sale, it's just like the other one. You transfer it to the dealer, they give you the rebate. So here's a little loophole. Let's say you have your heart set on a particular EV, but it doesn't meet the requirements that are listed here for US content for these various things. You can lease that EV. It's a loophole in the IRA because the tax credit when a vehicle is leased is for the vehicle owner, the lessor, not for you, the lessee. So the dealer gets the tax credit, not you, but presumably they would pass it on to you in a lower cost lease. That's certainly something that you can negotiate with them, right? So this is a leased EV, even if they don't meet those sourcing requirements that were on the previous slide. I don't know how they missed this when they wrote the IRA, but they did. So if there's a particular EV that you really want that doesn't meet the requirements, consider leasing it instead of buying it. This does mean you have a wider range of vehicles that you can consider because you don't have to meet those requirements. Okay, and then there is an EV charging tax credit. So this is for installing, I guess I would call it a faster charger on your property. So for example, I have an EV and I just charge mine from a regular 120 volt outlet, which is called trickle charging, because my husband and I drive very little. So that's sufficient for us, the fact that it charges slowly. So this is for actually installing infrastructure to charge at a faster rate. Now, this is not these, I mean, I guess if you wanted to put a supercharger in your home, you could. Those are the kind of things that you see, being rolled out by companies who are trying to make money on putting chargers in. But this would be for something that's more than a trickle charger, if you want to have it in your home, and 30% tax credit, maximum of 1,000. However, you can only qualify for this if you live A, in a rural area, or B, in a low income area. So this tax credit is not available to everyone. And if you want to understand if you're rural or low income, I tried to pull up this thingy from census.gov that has interactive maps that shows some of that stuff. Hopefully it's the right link, because I know they have these links out there from the government so you can see, am I technically considered in a low income census tract or whatever, or am I in a rural census tract? So you'd have to verify. So anyway, but of course, like I said, you don't have to have one of these chargers if you don't drive a lot. You can trickle charge like me. All right, and examples to put it all together. So I'm just going to show you this website because you can play with it later. But this is a handy dandy website where you can go in and put in your personal information, and this will tell you what kind of incentives you qualify for, right? So put in whether you rent or own, because some of these incentives can be for renters, because some of these appliances, these electric appliances, are portable. You can take them from one apartment to another, right? You put in your zip code, your electric utility, your income, your filing status, and then you continue on and it tells you what incentives you qualify for. And I believe that they recently upgraded this to include state incentives, not just federal ones. I haven't tried it since then, but I did get an email from them that seemed to imply that they were also now including state incentives. So check it out. It's easy to use. And then there's the Rewiring America guide. I also have that open just to show you really quick. This is a fun little document from this nonprofit Rewiring America, if only I could speak, that goes through and does a bunch of case studies, which I think are really interesting. Let's just see if we can go to that section. Let's see, where are we? Like here, we have the Colemans, a modest income, family of 4 in Cleveland, what kind of plan can they come up with? What kind of discounts can they get? And it shows you their plan, what year they're planning to do it, what their discounts are, their rebates, their tax credits, blah, blah, blah. And then they go through a bunch of other cases. 4 people, this one is a low income family. Actually, no, I think it's the same family. And here we have 3 people, income of 130,000, which means they're moderate income in California. They develop a plan for them. These are just examples, but it gives you some idea of what you can do and what you could qualify for. And they do have another example in here of people who rent. And that's this one here. An older couple, older retired couple who are low income in Atlanta, Georgia, who rent. And what can they benefit from as low income people who rent? So they've got a number of different cool examples, and I will send this out as a follow-up just because I think it's inspirational to get you thinking about what you can do with these, potentially if you qualify for the rebates, or if not, from the tax credit. So that is the end of household incentives that I'm going to cover. I thought I should take a little break. Are there any questions or comments for the household stuff?
It's really good to have it all together like this. Thank you so much.
Well, and keep in mind, I only included the things that I thought were the most broadly applicable. So there are probably, I mean, sure there are things that I have not included, but at least this covers what I think most people could be interested in. You may have a special case though, right? Any other comments on household stuff? Otherwise we will talk about it. I'm sorry?
One question on, you say you use a trickle charger on your EV?
Yeah, that's just a regular 120 volt outlet. I didn't put in anything
I got the
special.
impression there was something that wasn't quite as expensive as, you know, the high supercharged Tesla charger. But there was
Oh yeah,
something.
that's just a
There was
240 volt outlet.
a mid-range kind of thing that you could do that wouldn't be so expensive, but.
Yeah, that's what many people put in. It's a 240 volt circuit, right?
Right, that's what
Like
I
you
think.
use on your clothes dryer. Most clothes dryers are 240 volt. So you'd have to have a 240 volt circuit to support that higher level of charging. I just use a regular 120 volt wall socket because my husband and I drive very little, so that meets our needs. Our car is always charged when we need to use it, right? But if you drive more than that, then you can use a 240 volt. And that's what most people are putting in for this charging infrastructure. Most of them are putting in a 240 volt charger, not those super fast chargers, really expensive things that, you know, like Tesla and those other companies install to make money off of them. These are mostly 240 volt that people put in.
Yeah, that's what my solar person is talking to me about, and I was sort of confused. How many miles do you say you put on it, and you got by
Our
on?
car, we drive about 3,000 miles a year, roughly.
Okay, well, I
Now,
forget
some of that is longer distance for traveling, and when we're traveling, we do use public chargers, right?
Right.
But when we're at home, we don't. I don't know. Would you say we drive how much per week in general? 50 miles at the most? Yeah, we probably drive 25 or 30 miles most weeks. We just don't do much driving, and it's simple to recharge that on the car from a 120 volt circuit every week. It's just.
Do you have batteries in your system?
I'm sorry?
Do you have batteries? You know, like, I'm trying to avoid batteries because of the huge cost, but are you able to charge consistently without batteries, or do you have to have batteries in your installation?
Well, so, okay, my home, this is kind of getting into the nitty gritty, but the specifics of my situation is I have a large solar array on my roof with battery backup.
You do have
So
batteries?
I generate more electricity than I use. So I'm literally charging my car with my own solar installation.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my personal situation because I have a large array on my roof that I purposely oversized to generate as much solar as possible. And it generates far more than what we actually typically need in our home. So I'm literally charging my car's battery from my solar array. But of course, most people are going to be hooked up to the grid and are going to be charging from grid power, right?
Right, and there's usually limitations on how many panels you can put on, at least there is with energy. You know, they don't allow you to oversize to do, you know, excessive.
Who won't allow you? In your state, you're not allowed to oversize, really? Because in
Pardon?
Texas, I can put however many panels on my roof I can fit. That's my business.
Well,
Yeah, it's gotta be something local.
well, yeah, I think it's energy's calling the shots in this case, I think.
Well, yeah, it may be your local energy company, because let's be honest, for household solar, which was on one of these other slides, where is it here? Yes, this one, the 30% tax credit. Oh, this one cannot be carried over from year to year, by the way. So you have to be able to use that in a single tax year, just an FYI. So it depends on the situation in your state, but most installers of solar try to get you to what they call net zero, where you generate enough electricity when the sun is really, really shining a lot to offset any costs that you may have, say, in the dead of winter or whatever, for your electricity. So most systems, most home solar systems are designed to net zero over the course of a year.
That's the way that's the proposal I got. Yeah.
Right, and that is the typical way they are designed. I told them that's not what I wanted. I told them, you put as many panels as you can on my roof. I want to generate as much solar as possible. So I am at what's called in Texas a generating station. So I have to fill out paperwork. This is the way it works in the state of Texas, because I sell that surplus energy to the grid as a generating station. And that's what you're required to do in Texas if you generate surplus. But that's a state law, right? So what you have to do in your state for your utility and what you're even allowed to do is going to be subject to your local laws. In Texas, nobody can stop you from putting solar on your roof. That's state law. The only thing the homeowners association can do is potentially tell you, no, don't put it there. It's too visible. You have to move it. That's the full limit of what they're allowed to do. And this is a deregulated energy market. So if I don't like the deal from company A, I can shop around and talk to companies B, C, D, and E. So we don't have that kind of sole sourcing situation that you probably have where you are, because that's more common in the rest of the country. So I shop around for the best deal as far as what they pay me for the energy I generate. But if you're not in a deregulated market, you don't have those options, and you may have additional restrictions from your electricity provider, right?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It can get a little complicated or confusing, maybe not complicated. But my understanding was energy was driving that, and they're changing the rules too by lobbying our legislature. We had net zero, you know, and now come August 30th, or no, September 30th, we only will get paid at wholesale rates. So in other words, as a generator.
Yeah, so you had net metering and it switched to wholesale. Yeah, they did that, I think. Didn't they do that in California as well? So yeah, you have to pay attention to these things that are happening policy-wise in your state, and be active in advocating on policy so that you can continue to promote, so the policies continue to promote clean energy. So because
if you get it done and commissioned, which I intend to do before that deadline, I'll be grandfathered in. So
oh, well, good for you. Some states, they don't do that. You don't get grandfathered. So any other discussion on some of this household incentives? Okay, well, let's move on to houses of worship. So there are some different types of incentives again. Tax credits with a direct pay option, because you're a nonprofit, you don't pay taxes, right? Production credits with a direct pay option. There are some grants and some loans. And I'm not going to cover absolutely all the programs, but again, these are the ones that I think could be of interest to a decent swath of faith communities. So here is the list of the different sources of incentives. Some clean energy tax credits, investment in production, the energy efficiency materials program, energy efficiency upgrades, clean commercial vehicle tax credit, and EV charging tax credit. So first, let's look at the investment tax credit for clean energy. So there's two different types. The first one specifies certain types of clean energy: wind, solar, geothermal, battery. Type 2 just says if it's net zero carbon emissions, it's covered. So if you wanted to put in a small nuclear reactor at your faith community, that would fall under type 2, but you're probably not going to do that. But you see, type 2 basically expands it so that anything that's net zero works. Like, I don't know, maybe you have a waterfall on your well, hydro actually. Oh, it's only pumped storage hydro. So other types of hydro would fall under type 2. So how much of a credit can you get? It's between 6 to 30%. The 30% is if you meet prevailing wage and registered apprenticeship requirements. Now, as a faith community, you want to ensure that workers are treated with justice. So clearly you would want to work with a contractor who is paying the prevailing wage and is using registered apprentices. So you should be able to get the 30%. Now, then there are bonus credits. You can add on top of your 30%, but this list of bonus credits, you can only get one of these. If you're in a low income community, remember that census tract thing? You have to go look. You can get 10% more, so you get 40% tax credit. If this is on tribal land, if any of you actually are close to where there are tribal lands, that's 10%. If it's part of a qualified low income residential project, like I know a church in Dallas that owns property that wants to build low income housing on it, they can qualify for that 20% bonus on top of the 30%. And then there's low income economic benefit project. So if you're doing something in a low income neighborhood that's supposed to improve the economy for people in that neighborhood, you can get 20%. So you add those to the 30, which is pretty sweet, but it doesn't stop there. Then there are stackable credits. Wahoo! These you can add as many as apply. Each one of them is 10%. So if you're doing your project on a brownfield site, in other words, a former industrial site, add 10%. If you're doing your project in an area that had tax revenues at a certain level attributed to the extraction, processing, transport, storage of coal, oil, or natural gas, or had high unemployment, guess what? You can add another 10% on top of that credit. Or if you're doing your project in a census tract or census tracts adjoining census tracts where a coal mine was shut down after 1999 or a coal-fired electric generating unit after 2009, add another 10%. And if you meet domestic manufacturing requirements, add another 10%. So let's say you want to put in a solar project. Meet the prevailing wage and registered apprenticeship requirements, 30%. Let's say you're in a low-income community. Now you're at 40%. Let's say you decide to buy solar panels manufactured in the US, 50% tax credit. I think you get the idea. So that's the investment tax credit. The production tax credit is similar. It's got the same type 1, type 2, except now the credit depends on how much you generate. So you're saying to me, Lisa, how do I decide between the investment credit and the production credit? Well, I would say generally speaking, you have to do the math and see which one's going to make you more money and which one's going to be the larger credit. But generally speaking, production tax credits are probably the way you want to go if you're going to do a large installation. So let's say that your church is sitting on a big honking piece of property and you decide to turn it into a solar farm. In that case, you probably want to be looking at a production tax credit because you're going to be cranking out some serious kilowatts, right? Whereas if you're just going to put solar on your roof, you probably want to look at the investment tax credit. That's my general rule of thumb, but you really should run the numbers because you obviously want to use the tax credit that is going to give you the largest benefit because you cannot combine them. You have to choose either investment tax credit or production tax credit, not both. Okay, and I haven't mentioned it here because it's rather involved, but you can't get tax credits directly as a nonprofit, as you know, right? So there is paperwork that is involved in getting direct pay for tax credits, just an FYI. There is paperwork involved in that, although I believe for the clean energy investment tax credit and the production tax credit, I believe you can also, and I would have to double check this, I believe you can transfer those to your builder or your architect in exchange for a price reduction, and then they take the tax credit. which is a way to avoid the direct pay paperwork, which frankly, it can be a bit of a hassle. But just be aware that if you want to use a direct pay option, there is paperwork involved in that and you need to get up to speed on it. Okay, the Energy Efficiency Materials Program. This is a grant, free money, wahoo, up to $200,000. This is for energy efficiency upgrades in existing buildings. So if you're building a new building, you don't qualify, okay? It's only for nonprofits. And it's only for energy efficiency. So if you want to put solar on the roof of your church, you cannot get this grant. If you want to replace your old boiler with an upgraded heat pump HVAC system, you could apply for this grant because that's an energy efficiency upgrade. So no renewable energy stuff, only energy efficiency upgrades. This is a 5-year program. It is administered by these prime selectees, and I forgot to open this website to show you because this is a little bit interesting how the Fed worked this out. So let me just show you this. So, okay, energy.gov, blah, blah, blah. Whoa. Oh no, it's undergoing routine maintenance. Ah, crap. Okay, well, I'm sorry, you'll have to look at this yourselves later. But basically what happens is to administer these grants, a bunch of organizations applied to the federal government to be selected as prime selectees, which means that they actually manage the grant applications on behalf of the government. And they have them in different regions. So there's a particular prime selectee, for example, that covers Texas for me. And then there's some other selectee that covers California and Washington. And based on the way I read the map when Energy.gov's website was working instead of undergoing maintenance, there are actually some states that do not have a prime selectee. So if you're in one of those states, I think unfortunately you don't have a mechanism to apply for a grant, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe there's still some way to do it. But in looking at the map, there were some states that did not have a prime selectee listed for those states. And I'm sorry I can't show it to you right now since their website is down, but you will have to go check it out yourselves afterward. Okay, energy efficiency upgrades. So improvements in heating, lighting, air conditioning, hot water, or your building envelope, insulation, stuff like that. You have to have at least a 25% efficiency improvement. This is a tax deduction. And of course, you can't take a tax deduction as a nonprofit, but you can allocate it to your builder and get a cost reduction from them. So that's the way that works. You basically transfer your tax deduction to your architect or your builder, and they give you a cost reduction as a nice thank you for giving me your tax deduction. Now, once again, as a faith community, you will want to meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship standards with whatever builder you work with. That means you can get between $2.50 and $5 per square foot, depending on the energy efficiency level that you achieve. If you do not meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship standards, number one, shame on you. But number two, you get a lot less money. It's between 50 cents and $1 per square foot if you do not meet those standards. You'll find in all of the stuff that came out of the Biden administration, there's a very strong justice component. You must pay fair wages. You must uphold apprenticeship standards. You must have a certain amount of US local content. There's a lot of those kind of things in the mix of the requirements. So pay attention to those. Okay, clean commercial vehicle tax credit. So if you have a church van, a church bus, what have you, you can get a tax credit to go with a e-van or an e-bus. I'm not sure what they call them. You can get 30% of the cost up to $7,500. However, if it's a really large vehicle, like you got a full-size bus, right? Then if it weighs more than 14,000 pounds, the tax credit goes all the way up to $40,000 for the incremental cost of such a vehicle. This applies to electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. And here, since it's a credit, you will have to apply for the direct pay option. I don't know if you can transfer it to the dealer and have them give you a rebate. I have to admit, I didn't look into that for the commercial vehicles. You can do it for your personal vehicle. Maybe you can do it for the commercial ones. I did not check that. I would have to go check. And then there's an EV charging tax credit. 6 to 30%. Again, you get the 30% if you do prevailing wage and registered apprenticeship. The most you can get is $100,000. So if you want to put in a Tesla charger in your church parking lot, the most you can get from a tax credit is $100,000 now, but there are additional restrictions. You either have to be located in a rural area or in a low income area. So if you're in a wealthy urban area, forget it. This tax credit does not apply to you. If you want to put in an EV charging station in the church parking lot, you're going to pay for the full freight yourself. So the other thing, this was supposed to be about federal incentives, but I wanted to talk about two different things that are not federal incentives that you should still know about. There are state incentives, and this is the website. Now, these state incentive listings are not all applicable to nonprofit organizations. Some of them are only going to be applicable to for-profit businesses. Some of them are going to be, let's put my zip code in. Some of them are going to be applicable only to residences. So you have to page through and see what's listed, right? And sometimes they also list some federal stuff that I don't know why they put it in here when it's supposed to be a state database, but okay, they do what they do. But you can see it here, like this one is a Texas incentive on interconnection standards if I'm an energy generator. But these ones here, these two are from the US government, so that's a federal incentive. But here's some more Texas ones. I'm in Harris County. There's a green building policy for county buildings. Of course, I'm not building a county building, but so it's got a fairly comprehensive list, and it does include some of the federal stuff. As well as the things for my state or even things that relate to my county, like Harris County. So you can put in your zip code and you can see what kind of incentives exist in your state and whether they apply to you as a household, right? Or they apply to you as a faith community. So this is pretty handy. And it's a nice little website. So don't just stick with the federal incentives. Go check out this list, see if there's any state or even county or other local kind of incentives that you can benefit from either as a homeowner or a renter in some cases, or as a faith community. You might be pleasantly surprised that you can get some attractive additional benefits. So the other thing I wanted to include, because I was surprised how many people don't know about this, so I want to make sure people know about it. So hopefully some of you have heard of PACE financing. PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, which is kind of a misnomer because it actually applies to both energy and water conservation projects, but that's what it stands for. And let's go take a look at the website for the national PACE. So we can take a look at where PACE is currently in the US. So here's the programs map. So PACE, why is PACE so cool? Okay, here's what's really cool about PACE. PACE is financing that can be up to 100% of your project cost, as in you pay nothing. You get 100% financing for the life of the equipment. So let's take an example of installing solar panels on the roof of your church. Solar panels have a 25-year life. And let's say you're going to spend, I don't know, $50,000 to install those panels. So PACE financing could finance the entire $50,000. In other words, you don't have to put a penny into the system yourself and give you a 25-year term. One of the requirements for PACE is that whatever you pay annually to pay back the loan must be less than your annual savings from the energy efficiency or water conservation improvement. That's the requirement to get PACE financing. So in other words, if you can qualify for PACE financing for your faith community, this is a net income generator from day one. So let's look at where PACE programs exist in the US. This is a federal program, but you have to opt in. And some states have not opted in, as you can see. The ones that are green have programs. Now, I don't know how it works in other states. In Texas, the fact that Texas has opted in doesn't mean that everywhere in Texas has a PACE program, because in Texas, either your county or your city has to opt in. So if we look at let's look at the Texas map, just the Texas listing, just to give you an idea. Because I don't know if it works this way in other states, because heck, I live in Texas and I don't know how it works in other states. But if you look at Texas PACE Authority, which will come up in just a minute here, they have a list of where is PACE in Texas. So the state has said, you can use PACE. You can use the federal PACE program, but not every city or county has opted in. So, whoops, come on. Here's a map of Texas with a bunch of locations showing where there are PACE programs. And if you look at it, there's a big long list of counties in Texas that have PACE programs. And no, these are cities, excuse me. And there's Houston, where I live. And then there's counties that have PACE programs. Because in Texas, just because the state has said PACE is okay, still your city or your county has to establish a program. I do not know if that's how it works in other states, but I just wanted to mention it because if you're looking at the national PACE and you live in, I don't know, Montana, and you say, gosh, Montana has a program, that's great, I should be able to participate. And then you go and do some further investigation and you find out it's like Texas and your county or your city hasn't opted in. Well, that's perhaps an opportunity to advocate with your elected officials in your county or city to get their fannies in gear to start a PACE program so that commercial properties that want to do energy or water conservation upgrades can get this attractive financing. So I wanted to make sure that people knew about PACE because it is so attractive. And I'm always surprised how many people have never heard of it. So PACE, as I said, is a federal program, but again, your state has to opt in, and it's possible, depending on how your state administers the program, that your city or your county also have to opt in. So
Now,
that's the end. Yes?
I'm looking at it, says commercial, and that includes nonprofit?
Absolutely. A faith community is a commercial property, 100%.
Okay.
I know we don't think that way, but that's the way
Zoning
it
it
is.
would be, but you know, I didn't know in this case what it would be.
Oh, no, absolutely. What they basically mean when they say commercial only is that PACE is not available for residences. There were 2 states that tried to start PACE programs for residences. I think it was Florida and California, and they had a lot of problems and they ended them. So PACE is only for commercial properties, commercial buildings, and only for existing ones. It's not about, I don't believe you can use it for building a new building. I think it's only good for upgrades to conserve water and or energy. But yes, a faith community is absolutely positively a commercial building because it's not a residence. So that's the end of my talk. There are lots of federal incentives that could apply potentially to your personal situation or that of your faith community. And I may not have covered them because I tried to pick the things that I felt were relevant for most people in most faith communities. So I'm specifically looking here at energy efficiency and renewables that are probably something that most places and people would consider. And just a reminder, there could be state incentives and special financing available. Be sure to check that out. So I'm going to stop my talk. I'll even stop sharing. And let's just, any other questions or discussion? And I will make sure that Noni sends out the deck, some of the other materials that I showed, so that you have all of that stuff.
So,
As, you know, so you can dig into it more. The things that interest you anyway.
all the links that you're showing there will appear in what you're sending us. That's what you're saying.
I'm pretty sure that I put them all in the deck, but I will double check because if I didn't include them, I will just send them to Noni and say, Noni, be sure to include these links as well, right? Because on some of the slides, I kind of ran out of space to put, there was some additional material I wanted to put in, but I was kind of out of space. Like on those ones where the tax credit can be carried over to the subsequent year, I didn't have any space to put that on the slide. I was out of room with all the other requirements and stuff. So some things I just didn't have room to put on the slide. So I did create a supplemental Word document, and I'll probably go through and just clean that up a little bit and maybe have her send that out as well, because in some cases there was more detail than I could fit on a slide. So I just kind of verbalized some of it, right? But yes, I will put together a nice package of follow-up materials for her to send out. I will not do that, however, probably until this weekend, just an FYI. So if you're like desperately want something right away, email me and I will send it to you because I won't be trying to put that stuff together until the end of the week. So discussion, comments, questions, concerns?
I think this is a lot of great information, Lisa. You know, a lot of stuff for us to kind of dig into and see what benefits us and what applies to us. So thank you for putting all this together.
You're welcome. I put it together last year for a talk. So Susan, you were trying to say something, but you were on mute.
Yes. Yes. So at church, we are looking into solar, and we have two way different approaches so far. So we're going to look for the third, to see what the similarities are. But I just wondered, is there a best practice for figuring out how many solar panels? And I know that each company has, but what I'm saying is their designs are so vastly different, taking advantage of different angles from our roof. We have a lot of different angles, I guess. And some are good to the one company and some are good to the other company. So I wondered.
So I think most companies are going to try to do the same thing with the faith community design as they do with the residential design. They're going to try to get enough panels on your roof so that over the course of the year, you essentially pay nothing for electricity. That some part of the year you're generating excess and getting paid for it, that's going to offset the other times of the year when you don't generate enough because it's winter and you only have 4 hours of decent sun, so that it offsets those costs. I suspect that they're going to take that approach because almost unless you tell them specifically not to, every gosh darn solar installer, that is the approach they take. So unless you tell them not to do that, that's what they're going to do. Now, as far as how they figure out how to achieve that, I would look at whether there's a difference in total number of solar panels, because you are paying per solar panel, right? You are paying per solar panel. So if installer A, because of the smarter placement of those panels, says that you can get to a net zero payments over the course of a year with 50 panels, whereas installer B says you need 55 panels, well, as long as you feel confident in what's been presented to you by installer A, that you really will generate enough electricity in excess in the summer, probably, to offset your additional demand in the winter, well, then I would go with the one who's quoting you 50 panels instead of 55. But you do have to feel confident that you're really going to achieve that kind of zeroing out over the year. I don't know if they will answer these kind of questions. There is a solar help desk that's offered by a nonprofit called Solar United Neighbors.
Oh, yeah.
I know they help residences. I don't know if they will answer questions for commercial properties, but heck, call them and see what they have to say.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll help you regardless. Now I don't think they operate in your state. Let me just take a look. Hang on.
Maryland.
A lot of the differences might become how they model. Most solar companies, I would imagine, are using computer models to, come up with, exact number of panels you need. And then there's also maybe the difference you see between your two commercial installers. One of them may be looking at lower wattage, like 200 watts versus 400.
Well, and that's also possible too. That's a very good point.
You get all this weirdness going on. And,
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. Not all solar panels are generating the same amount of kilowatts, right, or watts. So maybe the company that's quoting you 55 instead of 50 panels or whatever is quoting you panels that generate less per panel that are cheaper. So you do have to watch for that because not all panels are the same. So Solar United Neighbors, these are the states they operate in, one of which is Texas, why I know them very well, right? They run solar co-ops. And I strongly recommend that if there's any entity in your area that runs solar
we're in
co-ops,
Maryland. Yeah.
Get in with them because solar co-ops achieve significant price discounts because solar installers, their biggest expense is marketing. So when you do a co-op, you get a group of people together who have decided they want to go solar. It totally cuts that marketing cost for the installers, and they will pass some portion of that onto you in lower cost installations. When I went solar with the co-op back in 2017, I saved about 20%. So Solar United
That's-
Neighbors is the one I know because they operate in Texas and they also operate in these other states listed here, excuse me. But there are other nonprofits in other areas that are doing co-ops, right? Before Solar United Neighbors started operating in Texas, there was a local nonprofit in Houston that ran co-ops, right? So I would go and look for these things to see if they're available because you can save some serious money by going solar through a co-op.
Cool. Yeah.
So, and let's see,
Good.
where's their help desk? Because they do have a help desk where you can call them up. Let's see. Oh, where is it? Because I sent it to my mom when she was looking at going solar. Let's see. They have all these guides, battery storage, going solar, HOA, FAQs. Where is the thing? They have a solar help desk. Gosh darn it. Well, you know what? Let me just see if I can Google it because I know they have a solar help desk. I sent it to my mother. So let's see.
You know, the other thing about that you have to be a little careful about is, you know, a lot of these solar companies, you know, tend to go out of business over time because, well, frankly, they aren't cut out for it, or, you know, they came late to the game. And I think just like any other major investment, you know, go to the recommendations, you know, who they've done work for before, and also you can research things like you can look at the specs in a solar panel and just take the name of the solar panel they got, look up, you know, what the quality of that particular piece of equipment is, because you know they're giving you a cheaper price and a lot more panels, you know, to cover your roof. It might be that, you know, that maybe their price performance isn't what you really want. I mean, they're going
What
cheap.
I've seen some installers do is they have bought a bunch of stock and it's been sitting in a warehouse for a while. And they want to move it out of the warehouse because they want to buy newer, higher performing panels. So they will
Right.
sell you an install for less money because you're getting older panels that don't have as high a performance. Now, if they still meet your needs, you're getting a better price. So maybe it's still a decent deal, but you should at least be aware that they're doing that. But I know what you're saying about a lot of these solar companies go out of business. Like the installer that did my install is gone. They were bought out. The company that bought them out no longer exists. But the panels are still under warranty. So the panel vendor, if I have a problem, or the battery vendor, because I have battery backup, still has to provide warranty service.
Mm.
So what they have to do, what they did, because another colleague of mine, he went solar in the same co-op that I did, and he wants to add some more panels to his existing system on his roof because he didn't fill his roof when he got the original install. So he contacted the panel vendor and got a list of installers in the Houston area that they now work with for warranty repairs because he wants to have someone do the work who is one of their certified warranty repair companies. So you always can go back to the manufacturer to get a list of certified repairers or servicers or whatever you want to call it in your area. Because yes, I agree with you. I have seen 2 of the companies go belly up since I contracted the array in 2017. It was installed in 2018. When I needed to get it serviced, there was a problem with the battery. Was it last year, Elmer? Last year, I found the original installer had gone out of business, had been bought out. So the new company that bought them out sent somebody out to fix the battery issue. And then when I decided I wanted to have some other upgrades on the system and I called this year, guess what? The one that bought out the original company, they're no longer in business. So yes, this is an issue, but you can always go back to the vendor for the warranted equipment and get a list of companies that are certified to do warranty repairs or servicing or upgrades, right? So that you feel comfortable that putting upgrades on an existing system, you're going to still not mess with your warranty because you're using a company that the vendor says is one of their warranty repair companies. So it is an issue. There are a lot of small solar installers these days. So I know what you're talking about because believe me, I have been there. I still need to get that upgrade done on my system. I haven't had time.
Maybe this only appeals to people like myself who just lost their sunroof to hail damage, but you might want to also look at the brand and, you know, the serial number, whatever is a particular solar panel, because there's a code. I don't know what the code is, that certifies that it will survive hail damage up to 1 inch. No, and that's typical of your decent installs, I would guess, that they'll
Yeah.
survive hail damage. And that's important because we're finding the cost of, like repairing the roof, things like that are almost as bad or worse than, on our church than the actual solar install. I mean, just,
So there's one other thing to
be up to
know,
grade.
that if you need, this is just a little clever tip. If you're looking at PACE financing, if it's available in your state and your location, let's say you want to put solar on your roof, but you also need a new roof. You can combine those into one project. And as long as the cost of putting solar as well as putting the new roof, as long as the cost of that to service alone every year is going to be fully offset by the savings in energy bills, you can include that as part of the project. Because it's necessary for you to replace that roof so that you can put the solar on.
Right.
So just keep these things in mind.
That's PACE, you say PACE does that? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, because they view it as, since your roof is in bad shape, you have to replace it in order to put the panels on. So it's part of the panel project. So that's, as long as you can then still have all of it financed and still have your annual loan servicing be less than your annual savings from your reduction in electricity bills, you still qualify for a PACE loan. So, okay, well, technically we're at time, but I told Noni I would remind people of one thing. So give me a second. I will do the one reminder I told her I would do. So let's see here. Let me share.
Lisa, I have another question before you leave.
Okay, let me just show this thing that I told Noni I would show just for her. It's the, where is it? It's just a reminder to go check out her August stuff on her Creation Care website. So just don't forget. I told her I would remind everybody. So I'm sorry, what was the question?
This last part of the conversation reminds me of something I heard from a Lutheran pastor in Pennsylvania recently. Her congregation is considering putting solar on their building, and they are uncomfortable with trusting the information they're getting from the installers, comparing things. As this conversation has indicated, there are a lot of intricacies involved here, things that come up even in this conversation eventually that hadn't been mentioned already. Does anyone know of any, I don't know, independent source of information that can guide people through this?
Well, that's why I refer to Solar United Neighbors. They have a bunch of guides on their website, and
Right.
they're a nonprofit. Their only vested interest is in seeing more solar go on people's roofs. Now, that being said, they are generally targeting households.
Mm-hmm.
So the materials that they have on their website are generally geared towards homeowners. That's not to say that it isn't good information, but they're probably not going to cover some nuances that would be applicable for faith communities. They are just now trying to start their first co-op for faith communities. It's being run, well, they're working with a retired Methodist pastor in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and he is working with churches in Dallas-Fort Worth, Florida, New England, and one other state. There's basically certain select geographies they have selected where they're working with churches. And he is Methodist, so I think they're predominantly working with Methodist churches, but I don't know that if you came to them and said, hey, I'm in Dallas-Fort Worth and I'm Baptist, do you mind if I join in? They probably would not say no, right? Let me just check my files and I'll tell you what different locations they're in. Because if you happen to be in one of those states, you might be able to get involved in that co-op, which could save you some money if there's no other co-op in your space, right? So let's see. Let me see if I have it written down here. Let's see. Dallas, Florida, Oregon, and New England. So those are the 4 states that he's currently working with to get faith communities signed up for this co-op, but it's been frankly a slow process versus what I've seen with the typical co-ops from Solar United Neighbors. But I do think the materials on Solar United Neighbors website are very helpful because, like I said, their only agenda as a nonprofit is to promote solar. They're trying to get everybody to go solar. And they're trying to help people do that by providing information and setting up co-ops so that people can get discounts. They don't install panels themselves, so they have there's no conflict of interest is what I'm trying to say. They
Right.
don't get a kickback from the installer, they don't have there's no conflict of interest in what they're doing. So I like their materials. I've worked with them. I know their representative here in Houston. She happens to be president of her church council. So I feel comfortable with them, but they don't operate in every state. So if there's a similar nonprofit that operates in your state, you might want someone that you can actually go talk to face, right?
Okay, thank you.
But barring that, I like Solar United Neighbors.
Uh,
There is
What
another similar organization called Groundswell that operates in a few other states. I think they operate in Maryland. Susan, have you heard of Groundswell? I think I
Yes.
sent you information on them. They operate in Maryland, they operate in Georgia. I think they might be in Arkansas, but I'm not sure.
Operating in Pennsylvania at one time. I don't know.
I'm not sure if they're in Pennsylvania because they started off in Washington, D.C. That was where they originally came from. And then
Yeah.
they kind of expanded into Maryland, as I recall. And then they started a big push in the South. I know they're in Georgia. I don't remember what other southern states. They are not in Texas. I can tell you that for a fact. But they tend to be mostly focused on community solar as opposed to solar co-ops. But nonetheless, they're a good source of information because again, they've got there's no conflict of interest. They're a nonprofit who is promoting solar.
Right.
One of the other members here in this group was working with revolve.org.
Revolve, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to say this is the best option, but they do have a platform in which they're a nonprofit helping out with nonprofits and a lot of churches and even projects in low income communities. And their model, basically, if I understand it right, it's basically, they get the funding, they put together the package for the church or whatever nonprofit, a combination of, financing, which they have access to. And also you have to have your solar installer improved by their organization. They won't just go with anybody. So I know with, Seal Solar here in Arkansas, they had to give a lot of paperwork to them, regarding their financial stability and all that kind of stuff, the good stuff about whether, the installer is reliable kind of stuff. So, but the only thing we didn't like about them is that they charge for all these services and they have technical people on their staff that know solar and all that kind of stuff too. The only problem about it is, I can't remember what it's at. I think it was like a 10% management fee. So, you get your project costs and you add on, 10% on that for them, they give good, in some ways it was still a good deal, but, for a couple of people on my committee, they thought it was too steep. So, but it was, I think,
Well,
10%,
So Revolve has an interesting model. And I think it could be attractive because again, it's got that zero down appeal that you can get with a PACE loan, which may not be available in your locality, right? So that has a lot of appeal and I can understand that. My only concern with Revolve is that they are newer and a bit smaller. And I'm not sure, how many churches they could really handle at one time. A more established organization, but that has a totally different business model is Collective Sun. But that's not going to be a zero down option, right? So there are various groups out there that work with, in many cases, with nonprofits, like Collective Sun or Revolve. That's their business model. And they have different ways of doing business and different offerings as far as helping you to go solar. Yeah, I would say you have to evaluate each of those on its own merits and decide, what you want to do. And if PACE financing is available in your area, I would very strongly consider that, right? Because it's very attractive. without having to pay overhead to revolve or to come up with financing yourself or whatever. Now, I'm going to be honest, PACE financing is probably not the cheapest, lowest interest loan you will ever see because there is some overhead there. They do have to certify that your project will be net cash flow positive from day one. So they do have to do that review and analysis. But heck, wouldn't you want to know that anyway? Wouldn't you want to know that anyway? That's worth something. So I really like PACE, and it's been very successful in Texas. I can tell you that. They've done some huge PACE projects and upgrades to major commercial buildings in Texas. And small ones too. I mean, the full gamut. So it's been super, super popular here, and I think it's a great program. So if you don't have it in your area, but your state has opted in, well, it's time to start talking to your local elected officials. And if your state has not opted in, it's time to start talking to your state officials about why the heck have you not opted into this terrific federal program that could really help people with commercial buildings like us nonprofits here to do upgrades on our property.
Right.
You know? So, but I agree with you, David, that it can be a little bit complicated. So if you have someone in your faith community who has the background, an electrical engineer, for example, I'm a chemical engineer, who has the background to try to look over the technical details of the proposals, I think that would be helpful. Or you might even want to consider even paying for someone to review different proposals who has the background to evaluate them for you, if you don't feel that you have someone in your faith community who's qualified to do that.
Yeah, that's always an option.
Yeah, because you don't want to
But
get.
it's not rocket science either. I mean,
Thank you all.
It's not rocket science either. I mean, I think a good person who has some electrical knowledge can figure it out.
Well, I guess I'm an engineer, so I automatically think of an electrical engineer, right? But you're right. It could be a builder. You could have someone who's a builder who probably could review these things for you as well, who doesn't have an engineering degree at all. But yes, someone who would be expert enough and comfortable reviewing the materials from the different proposals from different installers or your different options. You know, if you're looking at Revolve or you're looking at PACE financing, you're looking at this, some of those things you probably want a financial person to actually look at how the finances play out. So yeah, there's some stuff involved here, but I think the bottom line of this presentation is there are so many incentives out there from the federal government. And again, I did not give you a comprehensive list. There are so many incentives that are available. It's kind of like money's almost growing on trees, you know? We should be taking advantage of the incentives that are being offered to make it easier for us to better care for creation. And I will try to send out a link. I'm going to remember, make myself a note here. There is a more comprehensive listing of federal incentives that is on Interfaith Power and Light's website. I will try to make sure that's in the links that goes out because it includes stuff that I did not include, right? That because I did a cut down of things that I thought would appeal to most people. But their listing is specifically for faith communities. It doesn't have the household part, right? Because they're Interfaith Power and Light, so they're only going to list stuff for faith communities. But I will try to make sure that goes out with the materials, the follow-up materials that Noni will send out, because they have a more comprehensive listing than mine. Like I said, I did a cut down. And there's some other things that could be of interest to your members that I didn't cover because they don't apply to faith communities. There's some special incentives for renewable energy in rural areas, but they only apply to for-profit businesses, not nonprofits. So not all the federal incentives apply to nonprofits, but there's some seriously sweet deals if you have a rural business, a for-profit business. So, okay, well, technically we're over time. Any last thoughts or questions? And I will try this weekend to get all the materials together and send them to Noni so she can send them out. Because I want to make sure I don't forget anything, you know? There's a lot of stuff out there.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I
Yes,
hope
sir.
I hear all of you
Appreciate
have successful solar projects or other energy efficiency upgrades.
Yes.
All right.
Uh,
Bye, everybody.
All right.